We have a fascinating plenary session this morning called Innovation Drivers in Relief and Development. And innovation has become a buzzword, a sense of the possible out there, and in many ways it's sort of interchangeable with technology. But it's also how new individuals, groups, or even bureaucracies work together in new ways and create new potentials and linkages. And we'd like to start the session by thanking UPS, and especially UPS's president, international president Dan Brutto, and the president of the UPS Foundation, Ed Martinez, for their partnership in innovation that allows organizations like Interaction to bring our members into a relationship with the private sector. And we have a room full of individuals from the NGOs. At one point we did a survey asking you how many of you worked with the private sector, and we found that it was a full 80% of our members did so. And as our worlds come together, how do we engage in the drivers of innovation between two sectors? How do we establish the levels of trust and interest so that we could achieve things? And particularly for our sector, how can we move beyond our individual organizations to the type of scale that is needed to engage with the lessons that have been learned from the private sector that occupies the same global space that we do? We're going to have a fascinating conversation that will start very soon. It'll be chaired by Interaction's board chair, Kathy Spahn, who's the president and CEO of Helen, Keller International, and would call the panelists up to join on the stage, and please welcome them. Thank you.
As Sam said, innovation is a real buzzword these days. Everybody thinks it's a great idea, or maybe not. Some people equate innovation with technology. It's all about IT, it's all about gadgets. Some people equate innovation with the emperor's new clothes. There's too much innovation out there for innovation's sake. Is it really something that's worthwhile? But it's a word, certainly in the panels and small sessions in the last day and a half, a word that's come up a lot of times. And as Sam said, there's innovation in high technology, but there's also lower, less elevated technology, innovation in toilets, in biochar as fertilizer. And there's innovation in processes, whether you're working on value chains, such as adding nutrition to an agricultural value chain, something near and dear to my heart, or financing mechanisms, as we'll hear about today. As we were preparing for this panel, one panel described innovation as a disruptor. And I think that's quite apt in a number of ways. And one of the best ways to disrupt and to spark innovation is to combine the different expertise of two different sectors, the NGO world and the business world. And the problems we all together are trying to solve are so immense that there's no way we can do it alone. We have to work in public and private partnerships to tackle these issues, and we have to bring our unique skills to the table. We've probably all been there, done that, have some scars and bruises to show for it, because cultures can collide. NGOs tend to look at the private sector with distrust, no offense intended, but NGOs tend to say, well, is the private sector funding us because they're really out just to improve their reputation and their bottom line? Do they really care about the people we're trying to reach? And businesses tend to look at NGOs as inefficient, perhaps unprofessional, laid back. I can't tell you how many courtesy interviews I've done for members of my board of trustees who've asked me to meet with a business executive who's looking for an easy retirement job as a CEO of an international NGO. So today we're hoping to explore what sparks true and beneficial innovation and how the environment can be fostered that promotes innovation for the greater good. So I'm delighted to introduce a diverse and wonderful panel. Dan Brutto, who's the president of UPS International. Dan started with UPS back in 1975 as a part-timer. He's now president of UPS International, so he handles global expansion. No small task for a company like UPS. He leads their international package division, freight forwarding, and the logistics business, as well as international package services. and is the key person for UPS efforts to respond to natural disasters such as the earthquakes in Haiti and Japan. Scott McCallum, who is quite a multi-talented guy, the former governor of Wisconsin, a professor at the University of Wisconsin, though I also understand you've taught in China, author of numerous publications, including a chapter in a book called Managing Technology to Meet Your Mission. Currently is president and CEO of the AidMatrix Foundation, which is a global technology nonprofit that provides supply chain technology and internet information systems. Mirza Jahani, who is co-chair of this year's forum, for which we thank you, and chief executive officer of the Aga Khan Foundation in the U.S. He's been there since late 2009, though he worked previously as their CEO in the United Kingdom, East Africa, and Tajikistan. So a bit of traveling there. Mm-hmm. In between these roles, Mirza worked for DFID, so the British Department for International Development, first in the early 80s in the UK and Botswana, and then back in 2004 for 5 years, providing governance advice to a host of what we can call very challenging countries around the globe. And all the way on my right, Lisa Nitze, who's Managing Director of Mission Measurement. There's been a lot of talk about measurement in the last day and a half. Lisa has extensive experience working with innovative social entrepreneurs. She was president and CEO of the Social Enterprise Alliance of North America, and before that, VP of the Global Engagement Team at Ashoka. She's consulted with a number of leading corporations, nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, including the White House Office on Social Innovation, the State Department, and the Clinton Global Initiative. And last but absolutely not least, Greg Wangerin, who is Executive Director for the United States for UNHCR, who came there in 2012 from Refugee One, which is a refugee resettlement agency where he was Executive Director. But he had an extensive career with UNHCR before that time, which included firsthand experience with some pretty dramatic refugee crises, including responding to the crises in Somalia and Afghanistan. So I'm going to start off with Dan, and certainly looking at your career within UPS, innovation has played a great role, and now it's playing a role in how you interact with the NGO sector to add value. When you innovate, what makes the critical difference of whether those innovations take hold or get rejected or fail?
I think for innovation for us at UPS, the first thing we look at is the customer and how to make their supply chains more efficient. So how it takes hold is, number one, it has to be scalable for multiple customers to use the same platform. So, and a quick example of this is our tracking and tracing system. Since I'm traveling internationally most of the time and I'm never home, I send my mother a birthday present, and she's elderly. And basically, as soon as that package got to her door when I was in Tokyo, I gave her a call and I said, "Mom, your birthday present's at the front door." And she said, "Son, where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm in Tokyo." She said, "Well, how do you know it's at the door?" I said, "Well, because I've got my phone here and I got a text message that said the driver just dropped it off about 2 minutes ago. Go down." She walked down, opened up the door, and there was her birthday present. But at the end of the day, she said, "Well, Dan, that's just because you're the president of UPS." To which I said, "Absolutely not, Mom. We do that for all of our customers around the world. But I still love you, and it's your birthday." So this whole idea of innovation and technology, one thing we have to realize is that it has to be scalable. It has to be used by multiple different people. The experience has to be consistent, and it has to be consistent around the globe. Now, let me take one step back. Last year, I think we had an issue in the Sahel, and when I talked to a lot of NGOs, they said, "Boy, Dan, we'd really like to get some help from UPS in the Sahel." And I said, "Well, we've got some aircraft that are parked on the weekend, and we've got them in Europe, and I'll tell you what, I will fly missions, 3 missions, one every 6 weeks down to the Sahel for absolutely nothing. We'll use UPS volunteers, we'll load the plane, we'll schedule where the landing is, we'll take care of the fuel, no worries. But the rule is I need at least 5 NGOs to fly on that plane, and it has to be full." So in 6 weeks, as Sam can tell you, in 6 weeks I asked my logisticians, certainly we've got the plane full by now. And they said, "No, Dan, we only have 2 NGOs that have decided to sign up." And I called Sam and I said, here's the difference between the private sector and NGOs. If I offered a free plane to the healthcare industry, not only would they take one plane, they'd want 10 more. And it would be Merck, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Abbott, all that. But in the NGO community, this whole idea of how to use the scale of a UPS. And at the end of the day, we were able to fly 3 missions. We were able to get multiple NGOs. We were able to fill all 3 planes, and it was very successful. But I say that in that innovation doesn't always have to come from specifically technology. Innovation can come with the ability for NGOs to get together to use a platform that would be much more efficient than the platform they're using today. So at dinner last night, we met with a bunch of NGOs, a couple on the panel with me, and we talked about how can we at UPS take our expertise and train the NGOs to understand the value of a supply chain so they could make better decisions when it comes to supply chain. Last thing I'll say, PEPFAR in Africa. We are the lead logistics provider for PEPFAR at UPS. We went in and about 90% of the HIV drugs were flying into Africa on air freight. Air freight is very expensive. We turned that around and we were able to put 70% on ocean freight by understanding and predicting where it was needed in multiple countries throughout Africa. The savings for PEPFAR is $100 million. Now that's the type of power, the value that a supply chain managed properly can have.
Of course, with branding, I don't think of UPS boats. I think of Brown. I think of my regular UPS guy in his truck. It's a good lead into a question for you, Scott, because AidMatrix has had an investment and a partnership with UPS to improve supply chain, and it's a great example of this, but I'd like to hear from you how it came about, and even more importantly, was everybody on your team on board from the start, or did you need to do any mindset reshaping?
We've got a number of NGOs here. Is everybody always on your team as you go through anything you do? Let's go back from the start. Originally, we came out of what had been I2 Technologies. People in technology are well aware of it. It used to be the supply chain technology globally. People inside the company said, this is so wonderful what we're doing. In fact, it's the type of supply chain that must be utilized by a company if they're going to be successful in the international arena to be able to compete. How can we apply those same tools to humanitarian purposes? And actually, it's very specifically, it was somebody who'd been in the military, said, looking at a refugee camp, goodness, they need supply chain work to be done. The challenge that we have in the nonprofit sector, amongst a number of challenges, one is and I've got a very business-driven board, which is always on metrics and things. I say we need to understand the difference in nonprofit and for-profit, of which many of us have been in both. So everything you do is putting things in the bank, paying dividends, paying off investors. Said for us, the only reason we care about money is to be able to help people. It's our mission. It's not a means to an end itself. Now that's one of the challenges you have in technology in the nonprofit is you want to help people. Why are you going to spend money in technology? So it's drawing that direct connection, which is, and yes, it is, as I mentioned, a disruptor, because anything you do, I'll just tell a quick story on the difficulty getting through in some of these things when you try to be innovative. And I'm sure everybody here wants to be innovative. Everybody wants to be innovative, but how many want to take a risk in innovation? How many want to be the first one to try something? In technology, there's a curve, a chasm curve. There are the innovators, the early adopters, and then it becomes, and that's actually what happened to us in a number of areas in technology. So in the food area, where almost all of the charitable food in the U.S. goes through AidMatrix technology, most charitable food in the U.K., food in Latin America, Asia, Africa goes through AidMatrix technology. It's no longer an innovation. You have to do it to be competitive. The disaster system we ran to show the innovation, the jump in the U.S., there are a few states, and people say, well, gosh, it's where the hurricanes, the disasters occur. Why is Minnesota on here? Anybody remember what happened in Minnesota? Bridge went down. All of a sudden, all the legal opposition they had disappeared. Why don't we have the system in place? There are now 49 of the 50 states. That chasm was crossed when in Homeland Security and others, the question went out to the governors' organizations. Here's the ability to have this tool. If you don't, why don't you? The risk became not having an efficient tool as opposed to having it. It struck me working with one of the agencies, and you think of innovation that I'd gone to, and I went in and said, here's what technology can do, here's what can help you. And they said, but you need to understand, it's taken us 15 years to get to the systems we have now. Why are we going to change? And you can see sometimes the mindset is just not going to be there. Or another agency I talked with where they said, well, this is great, it looks wonderful, but you know, we've never done this before. We can't do it. And it's, well, if you haven't done it before, you're never going to do something new. So that's how it evolved. Those are some of the challenges. As I say, a disruptor, as you look at it, it's not always easy to be innovative. It's nice when it's successful. I had a friend who said, McCallum, you're trying to help things become more efficient. And you wonder why you're getting frustrated with some of these things. You know DC as well as anybody. DC is not built on efficiency. And the fact is, when you think of it, where the money flows, it tends to be status quo, even within your own organizations. Things are done a certain way. To change is difficult. So that's where AidMatrix came from and some of the challenges we've had.
Which is great to share, and I think I want to build on that with Lisa and your experience and what it takes to have, if you will, an enabling environment where innovation can and, importantly, where innovation should happen.
Thanks. I've done a lot of thinking about this, particularly as the CEO of the Social Enterprise Alliance, and again, UPS is a major supporter of that and always has been. And essentially, social enterprise, as you guys know, is the intersection of for-profit and nonprofit. It's social mission businesses with revenue generation in their models to enable them for sustainability and scale. So by definition, in the models and everything they're doing and all their interactions, there's huge innovation. And I spent a bunch of time going around the U.S. looking at how do you create fertile environments in different states. Wisconsin is one of them that's terrific at that, for enabling these organizations to thrive. And at Ashoka, I was looking at how do you have corporations and philanthropists and foundations invest in sources of resources, invest in systems change actors, and why to scale innovation. And currently in the consulting firm that I'm with, we're looking at it at the individual organizational level. You know, how do corporations use innovation in their business models and grow it? How do nonprofits do that to change for greater sustainability? And I think the first thing about it is this definition issue. You know, innovation is not just new products. It's new processes, it's new ways of approaching things, it's new partnerships, and also it's new organizational structures. I mean, social enterprises are hybrids that are proliferating in all sorts of weird shapes and forms. But using that greater definition or broader definition, a couple of things that I found that were critical. One is, it's critical that the actors, the sources of resources in an environment, have a understanding of each other's motivations, agendas, definitions of success. Because if they do, you know, you getting the nonprofits onto the plane, them getting onto the plane, if they understand why you're asking, and if you understand why they didn't get on the plane, it would go a lot better and quicker. So understanding what the definition of success is and how people's agendas are formed enables much better and quicker innovation through collaboration. The other thing is data. I'm now with Mission Measurement, so of course I'm going to say that, but it's really true. When I was in the Social Enterprise Alliance, the White House said, help me make the business case for investing in social enterprise. And I said, well, we'll just go get some data and prove all the great things that they're doing and the incredible social and financial impact. In fact, there is no data. There is no data, and then therefore you can't make the case for the time, energy, investment, and initiative to be partnering with or investing in things. Access to capital. There's tons of capital, but innovation by definition, innovative approaches or initiatives don't fit the risk profile, back to the risk issue, they don't fit the risk profile of the sources of capital. By definition, they are much more conservative than the reality of an innovative approach coming at them and asking for money to start up or grow. So there has to be creativity and there has to be openness on the parts of the sources of finance. That's where social impact bonds come in, which is a wonderful, innovative way to kind of get things unstuck. Policy and regulatory environments. I spent a bunch of time going around to the different states. L3C legislation is enabling nonprofits to access different forms of capital and making it easier for them. Beneficial corporations is enabling corporations to do triple bottom line thinking and be protected from shareholders who may be angry at them for taking into consideration social and environmental issues along with financial issues. That kind of thing is really important in making things easier. But the most fundamental thing in having the opportunity to go around the world with Ashoka and also with the State Department on this is looking at environments, countries, regions, states that are most fertile and have most active innovation on all different levels. They really, I found the commonality that they have is that the stakeholders, they have a norm of stakeholders working together and collaborating to leverage resources for efficiently approaching shared agendas and solving shared problems. And just as you were saying, it's collaborations where the majority of the assets being shared are in kind, not in cash. So you're sharing the plane, you're sharing the building, you're sharing the human capital. Somebody else is coming up with actual cash. But that's only one component of it. And if you've got stakeholders in an environment or a country or a region that are used to working together like that, there is innovation going on at every single intersection and as a whole. Finally, in individual organizations, which is where I'm working now, one of the most important things is leadership from the top. And many ways that innovation is celebrated in the culture. And extremely importantly, a line item in the budget for innovation. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into and they've said, oh yes, we ask everybody to innovate, and of course they are supposed to innovate, but then they also are supposed to meet their numbers. By definition, those two don't go together. There needs to be a line item. And finally, the new thing is networks. You guys know this better than I do, but networks of intrapreneurs who are the change agents in the organizations, and having them know about each other and share best practices and quickly and efficiently be spreading ways to effectively be innovating is the other thing that scales it.
Very pragmatic and helpful, thanks. Mirza, Aga Khan Foundation has developed a creative, innovative way to finance development. How can what you've done be replicated and taken to scale, as the panel's been talking about?
Thank you, Keji. I think listening to the previous three speakers gives me an opportunity to sort of tweak some of what I wanted to say in order to respond a little bit to what they've been saying. I think in terms of risk, leadership, cultures, the different cultures of public sector and private sector have all come to play in developing this partnership of $61 million with U.S.A. and the Aga Khan Development Network to try and do things differently in Afghanistan. I mean, the story starts sort of 24 months ago, where His Highness the Aga Khan and Hillary Clinton met together on the side of some conference somewhere and really sort of asked the question, can we do something different in Afghanistan? Is there something that the Aga Khan Network could bring forth that might create a different sort of approach to development? So we've created this GDA, which really has three strands, which brought different cultures from across our network, both for profit and for not-profit together, to see if we could work together and create some different approaches that might have greater impact. The first thing was that we were clear in our minds that social development had to be part of the equation, that we could not forgo or leave behind health, education, rural development, governance, a set of issues that we work on. So a large component of the financing will go to that part of the program. You must excuse this hoarse sound of mine as well. Thank you, Scott. So the first part of the program is the social development. But our data, listening to Lisa, our data and our experience, and I think what we would say is that whilst we might not have hard data, we had a lot of experience about doing social development. And that experience in Afghanistan and other places told us that we could not actually achieve sustainability in fragile states of health, of education, of rural development. That there had to be some mechanism that would provide an ongoing source of support for these sorts of activities that we do, and that all of you do in various places, I'm sure. And so what we said to the private sector group was, you may do power stations, you may do agriculture processing, you may do whatever it takes to create jobs and local economy. We call them major economic drivers. But we will invest alongside with other impact investors in that process. And the returns that you make on that, you will apportion a part of them to a trust fund, which will then support social development over the long term in different geographies of Afghanistan where we are going to be doing this multi-input area development approach. And I think the final point I would make is that as we've now, this agreement was signed just last month, and as we've started to sort of sit down with our private sector colleagues, lo and behold, all the sort of cultural differences come to the fore. And I think this is a challenge. And I think that the sort of thing that Dan and Scott were saying is something that we'll have to embrace, and knowing that they have a different set of values. But fundamentally, if you come together to look at the twin worries that we all have of sustainability and scale, there's no way around it for us in the future. We really do think that this public-private partnership is worthwhile doing. I think it is risky. I think many people say this is bold, but also I think equally some people might say this is foolhardy, because you're going to try and create a really very different way of doing business. It has attracted sufficient interest from other donors as well to see whether or not we can create a multi-donor approach, and it's something we're going to try and test out in Pakistan as a next phase.
We wish you luck and strength. Greg, as part of the UN system, which overall is moving towards more innovation in their programs, you're dedicated to protecting and assisting refugees around the world. Do you really need to innovate? Don't you already know what to do to help?
In a word, yes. We need to innovate. Actually, innovation is inherent in refugee support, refugee protection, refugee work. Our field staff are confronted with challenges daily, whether it be financial or material, how to ensure that the refugees' needs are met right then and there in the deep field. And so it's inherent in the work to be creative with solutions. Let's take a step further back. Who are the ones who are really with their backs against the wall? But it's the refugee herself. We can see innovation and creativity on the part of the refugees themselves on a daily basis. As Plato said, invention, necessity, how does he say it? Necessity is the mother of invention. And so a refugee who's pressed against the wall, together with our team, can create and innovate in new and different ways. And so UNHCR seizes and grabs hold of the opportunity of working with the private sector, with the corporate world, and with the business community to find new solutions, to do things in a more efficient and more creative way. We have a few examples on this. First of all, our partnership with UPS and the Tracking Solution Project, where in a nutshell it's using modern technology to track the distribution of non-food items. And this is a project which is soon to be replicated in the field. Another partner of ours is IKEA. And IKEA with UNHCR goes back a couple of years. They gave a lump sum of funds a few years ago to create space within UNHCR headquarters where we would have an innovation unit, which is not a normal thing for UN agencies or not-for-profits to spend time to create and to create space for creative failure. Along the lines of the IKEA program, they've made some funding available for some quick impact solution projects with emergency shelter, which we hope to roll out in Dolo Ado camps in Ethiopia. One last example, Skype. Skype recognizes that, and our partnership with Skype has led to the fact that field staff of UNHCR who are scattered across the nations of the world in some 150 non-family duty stations are missing their families and are missing contact with people at home. So Skype used its technology to develop low bandwidth technology so that Skype would make opportunities available for staff to talk with family and to see their children grow and be in touch. Now, again, stretch that one step further, what that can do for refugees and reuniting families. So clearly UNHCR is committed to this whole idea of innovation and working with the private sector to seize on opportunities for a win-win for all.
And you've just taken Dan's birthday present for his mother to a global humanitarian
Absolutely.
scale. So this is great. Dan, I know you're committed to use UPS's strength and innovation to leverage the efforts of the NGO sector. So I want to push you a little on that and ask you, how could you be even bolder than you're being right now? How could you maybe go out of your comfort zone as a company to do more to leverage your strengths and our goals?
Yeah, I would say in two main ways what the next evolution really is. One is to treat supply chain as strategic instead of transactional. And I think that means that from an NGO perspective, you have to realize that the folks that you have running your supply chain have to have expertise in that field. Yeah. They have to have expertise into multimodal to understand when to use ocean versus air versus rail. They have to have expertise in warehousing. Do I warehouse or not warehouse? They have expertise in technology, as far as what type of technology do I use. If I'm doing my own independent technology and trying to write proprietary software for an NGO, I can tell you in UPS, we got out of the business of writing proprietary software many years ago. So that, to look at it strategically instead of this is just another function, I think is where NGOs have to go. That will precipitate multiple NGO supply chain people getting together naturally. The best supply chains in the world today are with technology companies, and they meet on a regular basis. Even though they compete, they talk about their supply chains all the time. Healthcare now is beginning to do that. Retail has done it for years. But NGOs, I think, from what I've seen, run their supply chains very separately, so they're not efficient. The second area that would really push us, quite frankly, and this gets out of UPS, is we need to make some investments in technology for some of the areas that NGOs go to that aren't developed. As Tony Lake from UNICEF tells me, Dan, we have to provide support for the poorest of poor who are in the most rural areas. And how do you do that? Through technology. So we have to innovate and figure out how do we get in the hands of a healthcare clinic that's in the middle of Mali a device that's $3 or $4 that can upload information and understand are the right products there at the right time And so multiple NGOs can see what's going on. Something similar that the governor's worked on is this whole global warehouse so we can see where things are. But that innovation, certainly we can't use our device at UPS because they're very expensive in most of the developed parts of the world, and they have a lot of information. But if you're going to take a device, I went out to take a look at areas in Vietnam and took a look, and most people in the world, even in very poor areas, have two things per family. One is a motor scooter, and two is a cell phone. Mm-hmm. So how do we harness that cell phone capability into something that we can innovate through UPS or through our partners like AidMatrix to provide you information so we can make NGOs more efficient, so you can take your operating costs down, so you can do more of the good work that you do. So those would be the two things that I think we need to go after.
I think you've probably hit on an area for future work at Interaction, is bringing together all of the member supply chain people to start collaborating. Scott, how do you know who to partner with from the get-go? Surely you've had partnerships that were kind of kumbaya and ones that were dreadful. How do you go through that process of deciding who to get into bed with?
Without naming names? All of them have challenges, particularly when you're going in a new area. But let me say, first of all, one thing I've kind of learned over time, it's really interesting how one person can truly change the world. I mean, I just find it amazing, and particularly when you're working on new things, how if somebody gets it and really sticks to it and works on it, how they can truly change not only that organization but the world. Mm-hmm. And from our perspective, when you're working on something new, a number of good things happen. And I will say UPS being one of them. As a corporate partner, I mean, I know everybody's looking for financing. It's nice to have the checks. But think of a corporate partner who's gone to another group you're trying to encourage to be efficient, who also provides checks to them, and said, you know, we want to provide this check to you. We want to help you, but we don't want it to be one time. We want it to become a permanent efficiency to really help you in the longer term. The check this year is going only if it's being utilized for technology and supply chain. That type, and UPS did that. Those types of things have really changed what is going on in the community. Interaction has done a great job, and the suggestion of bringing people together, CARE International, Save the Children, Catholic Relief Services, Children International, UNICEF we work with, our organizations. There are 52,000 organizations worldwide on AidMatrix technology. Some going entirely with the supply chain, from procurement to not as expensive, not as sophisticated, and not as good as UPS, but in many areas where there isn't internet, where there isn't energy. We have to build systems. Our systems need to be able to work offline and be able to sync online, which aren't, a lot of companies can do that. But these types of groups that I've mentioned are working as user groups with the support in the private sector, like UPS and others we work with, bringing together really as leaders in the community. And I find because of that, the leadership that they're providing, it's going to be, they're the innovators. The early adopters are going to have it much easier now. And I think will be welcomed in, but it's driving the cost down for everybody. So if I could say anything, thank these people for helping you, because they're really, what they're doing is going to help make it more efficient in your operation, help you achieve your mission.
Dan, you're going to be a very popular man when you get down off this stage. You have a lot of people who approach you. Lisa, I want to turn to the really challenging issue of measurement, because you have a lot of expertise in making sense of measurement in some very complex situations. Tracking social return on investment is not an easy thing. So how do you do that, and how do you use data and measurement to track a social return on investment?
Thank you
In
for
4
asking.
minutes or less.
Mission Measurement, where I currently am a managing director of the Washington office, is a social impact strategy, design, and measurement firm. And I've been in the business of positive social change and social impact for 30 years. And the reason I'm at Mission Measurement now is because As somebody who started out as a storyteller and continues to be a storyteller and can usually tap dance faster than the next guy, I've run into a brick wall. It just doesn't work anymore. Telling a great story no longer will do it. For getting the level of investment to be sustainable in a social mission organization, and for getting the level of investment that enables you to scale. Basically now all funders, whether they're corporate partners, whether they're foundations, whether they're governmental entities, they are all looking for a social return on investment statement, and you have to be able to make one. So what we do is work with nonprofits, corporations, and international development organizations to measure their social impact and be able to report out on it. And the point of that is to be able to make better investment decisions, to be able to engage in continuous improvement in investment decisions, to be able to tell your story effectively so people can tell what impact you're having, and then to be able to gain the resources that you need to stay successful and to grow. I mean, really, if you really want to scale and blow out the social impact that you're trying to have, you must have data. So, I mean, what do I mean when I say that we do that? I mean, essentially what we do is we look at intended impact. And we'll go into an organization and say, what is the intended impact, the North Star, this change in status in the world that you want to bring about as a sum total of all your investments and activities? And once you get there, then you say, okay, what are the outcomes that are going to happen to roll up into that impact? And what are the strategies that are going to drive those outcomes? And what are the metrics? What are the things that you can measure along a continuum to tell that you're moving in the right direction towards that outcome? And what most people do is they measure outputs. They'll say number of beds in bodies, number of households served, number of students in a classroom. And what an outcome is, you know, I mean, is that a lot? Is that a little? Is that good? Is that bad? What happened? Did the good thing happen that you wanted to have happen? Simply giving numbers or counting things doesn't tell you that. So that measurement means measuring towards impact. And impact is what good thing happens as a result. Do the students learn more? Are the people healthier? Are the households more stable? So what we do is we basically go in and we work with nonprofits. And with nonprofits, essentially what we're doing is we're helping them measure to make good investments of resources, and most importantly, measure in order to be able to secure funding. And it's really investments on the part of a UPS or any other corporation or any other entity. They're buying social impact by investing in a nonprofit. With international development organizations, we're working currently with U.S.A. and IADB and a number of others, and they're really looking at how do you measure to be able to report out on aggregate development impact across geographies and across interventions. And we do that. Others we're working with on how do you measure uptake by an ecosystem of a systems change intervention that you funded. And with corporations, we're doing an enormous amount of work with corporations because corporations basically have triple bottom line thinking that they're doing in their decision making internally. They're trying to increase their ESG ratings for publicly traded companies, environment, social, and governance ratings that they all get. And they're also trying to attract and retain the employees that they want. And those employees are all saying, we're not going to work for you unless, correct me if I'm wrong, unless we get to be making social impact investments on the job instead of at night once we've gone home from the job. So corporations are basically looking for how do we make the business case internally for investments in sustainability and corporate citizenship? How do we make the case externally for the good things we're doing in investing in the communities? And how do we, increasingly, how do we measure social value as perceived by our customers and bake that into the design of our products and our services that we're delivering? I'm sure you're doing that, and we could have a great conversation about it. But data across the board in this industry is increasingly, I think, the most powerful driver for enabling scale and growth.
Thanks very much. You make it sound easier than it surely is. We clearly have a very pro-innovation panel, but I'm still going to push on this because I still believe that sometimes innovation isn't what is needed. Sometimes it's traditional, painstaking work that's proven to be effective. So I'm going to put Mirza on the spot on this.
Yeah.
What are the limits to innovation? When is innovation not needed?
I'm going to answer that, but can I just say a little bit about what Lisa just said on data and the value of data? Two things that were missing in your intervention, which I would like to just pose. One is that for true impact assessment, it's a long-term endeavor. Mm-hmm. Outputs are easy, outcomes are easy, but impact is really very difficult in that chain of results that we're looking for. Yep. And I don't still find the appetite in our supporters for that time frame that's needed. In this Afghanistan partnership that I was talking about, we've actually tried to set up a learning agenda which will be over a decade, because we are putting some of our own money into it. Which brings me to the second point, which is collecting good data is actually costly. Sure. And so we shouldn't make, I mean, you know, I go to lots of conferences and people keep saying that this is very important and we've got to measure ourselves, etc. But very few people actually then say it's going to be costly to do that. And so who is going to pay for that? And you know, oftentimes when you're renegotiating a contract or something like that, it's these soft things that get cut out. So we do need to push back as a community on that. And I don't know whether Lisa, you want to say something later on afterwards to me about that. But on innovation, Kathy, yeah, I agree. Innovation, I was struck by the lady from Zimbabwe, whose name I can't pronounce, who made the intervention yesterday. She said innovation is taking place all the time, out there in communities. We don't recognize it as innovation because it's not labeled and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles on it. And it's not, innovation is more than just technologies. Innovation is how you go about doing things. And if you look at, it includes how you go about doing things. And if you look at that, then I think you'll find that a lot of our teams, a lot of our partners out there innovate all the time. So I think with that in mind, I would sort of say that innovation is needed, changing the way we do things are needed, but that they're not necessarily defined as that we see in our papers, and technology is not part of that. So I think if you look at innovation like that, you'll find that things do change and things do improve, and that improvement is palpable. What we don't do, those of us who've been in development for a long period of time, go back to the communities we first worked with or worked with about 10 years ago. And the change is palpable. And so one of the things I find myself asking is to what extent can we look for new tools to measure change? How often do we send up a video to our funders to say, this was the conversation that the communities themselves had about change in their environment as a result of this program. View this for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and you'll get a very different sense of change that is occurring. So, I mean, I think we as a community have some ways to go, but I agree with you that we should not just simply say we're innovating for the sake of innovating. There has to be a purpose behind it.
I think it's definitional. If you define innovation as change, we're all changing all the time. So then, yes, innovation is pervasive. Greg, when we chatted briefly before the panel, and I talked about the last question I asked you about why did UNHCR need to innovate, and you said, oh my God, we need to innovate everywhere. How much time and attention needs to be paid to getting buy-in throughout your organization?
Too much. UNHCR, let's face it, is a huge global organization. It's a big UN bureaucracy, although it's nimble in some respects, but largely speaking, there are staid colleagues, we call them dinosaurs, and there are ways where we have challenges multiculturally, and to say nothing of the financial constraints. There's not room for failure. And so change, as we're saying, becomes very difficult. And we need to invest a tremendous amount of time, more than we would like, inside the House to get the buy-in. That said, because there is support from the highest level, the High Commissioner who spoke yesterday, and especially with the Deputy High Commissioner, Georgetown University Dean Alex Leinikoff, it's his pet project. Because there's that support from the top, the Innovations Unit has this creative space to fail. And again, because of support from the business community with some earmarked contributions for that Innovations Unit, it's giving opportunity for ground-up solutions to filter their way to the top and to be kicked around a bit. But too much time needs to be spent to change the organization.
Thanks. Before we open it up to questions from the audience, I just want to ask the panel as a whole if any of you are willing to share any of your scars and bruises from the partnerships, the innovation partnerships, public and private working together.
I'll take it. I referred to this IKEA grant. So we thought it would work well in Kenya. And it's a large investment. And the intention was to work within a given circumstance in a refugee camp to test some of the shelter programs. Well, unfortunately, for one reason or another, not enough homework was done with the Kenyan government to prepare the way for them. And after, and I'm hoping I'm not embarrassing anybody from Kenya here, but after about 6 weeks into the project, we were forced to reconsider the location and had to move the whole show to Ethiopia.
I'll share one as well. I was sitting here thinking, okay, because it's a constant challenge when you're working, or you try to work through challenges. But there was a project that we thought was quite successful, and it shows the difference in cultures in nonprofit. We have a transportation portion in supply chain where nonprofits can go on and they can put out in bid each time, and UPS helped us build this for nonprofits. We prototype this in an area in the delivery of food and food banking. And we ended up with the project, thanks to the grant and the grant regionally, of saving on average $125 per load. Just by having, and this was funding that was used for transportation that could then be used for the purchase of food. When the grant ended, the organization didn't put it in the budget to continue the program because they didn't want to spend the money on transportation or on the technology. And it's, I wasn't willing to subsidize it entirely because I think everybody needs skin in the game. But it really kind of hurts when you see something work so well and save money, but because it looks like an expenditure, not to continue it.
Yeah, I guess I want to pick up where Lisa left off and just let everyone know that our volunteer hours at UPS for the last 5 years have grown twice as fast as our revenue.
Wow.
So,
Meaning tracking your employees.
we track our in 2012 we did 1.6 million volunteer hours at UPS. I think that's important for every NGO to understand that the new employees and the employees that we have in most private organizations are volunteering, and they not only want to volunteer their hours, they want us to use UPS's assets where they volunteer, and they will only give if they can volunteer for the most part and they feel good about it. And from that, I can tell you that there are places that UPS used to write checks to that we no longer will write any checks to because our employees have said, I've researched that company, I've volunteered for them, and I don't think that's a good use of our money. So I don't know if that's a bump or bruise, but the reality is today, this whole intersection of public-private is going to become much, much closer. And I wouldn't be
Sure it is.
surprised if you're going to see many more employees go from the private sector to the public sector, back to the private sector, just to increase the efficiencies. I know we have a logistics emergency team that Ed Martinez has started for us, and we're oversubscribed. These are people that will go anywhere in the world with 24-hour notice, and most of them will write me letters after they've gone on these earthquake in Turkey and Haiti and say, Dan, I'm happy to take my vacation time to do this.
Wow. Bravo.
That's the type of people that we have. Now, challenging, they'll also say that Haiti is probably the worst managed situation of NGOs colliding with one another that they've ever seen. So this whole intersection, I think, is going to make, supply chains more efficient, but it's going to put pressure certainly on NGOs.
Well, and those are people supply chains, but just so you recognize, anytime there's innovation with this occurring public-private sector, there are new challenges. Are the employees culturally sensitive? Are you changing, are they the right type of volunteers that you need? And if you think of it as a cost or a resource, you better have a value, and we need to understand the new challenges then of training volunteers or having the appropriate volunteers. So back to the earlier part of
Excellent
innovation,
point.
there are always trade-offs that we need to be careful of that create new challenges.
No, excellent points. Let's open it up for any questions of any of the panel. I don't know if there's someone with a mic. Yeah, she's coming.
So I find that we often think of innovation as a concept, as something that involves moving forward, some orientation towards the future. And I'm wondering if actually there's a role for historical thinking in innovation, that actually there's innovation that's been forgotten, that ought to be recovered, and that often the movement towards some sort of future orientation in this discussion actually loses things that may have worked in other contexts and that need to be retrieved.
We say it, but we can't remember.
Actually, it's a really good point because, and I was just at a reunion at my business school and talking to one of our leading national venture capitalists about their strategy for investing in innovation. And they said what we do is we look at innovations that failed 5 years ago. Our strategy is around, if it failed 5 years ago, in the first iteration of it, it will then have resurfaced another couple of times and failed those times, and then about 5 years later it will have been refined enough so that the innovation coming out is the right one to invest in. And I think that's true of social change initiatives, it's true of product launches, it's true of anything. So I think, part of a fertile environment for innovation is one that celebrates failure and allows failure to be an active part of moving forward.
Bill, and then...
All right, thank you very much. I think the concept of innovation is really great, but I'm very worried that we are actually missing key point here. While innovation is a great concept, I think there's many parameters that we need to take into account, and one of them would be coordination, culture, and taking risks. And I think you guys spoke very well about some of the operations, for example, in Haiti or Mali, for example. And I was actually a little bit concerned about places like where UPS works. There are very remote areas where maybe there are great tools that have been innovative and developed. But unless these tools are shared and are put into some sort of a great coordination, there will be no greater impact. And I was wondering whether you guys are thinking about this notion of, yes, innovative ideas, but with many other parameters that need to be taken into account: risks, culture, and coordination.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'll try to answer it. I think one of the things that we look for in a business is something that scales. So as I said before, we don't have multiple tracking systems around the world, we have one. We have a pilot project to answer where we're trying some technology with UNHCR, with Save the Children, to essentially start tracking at the local level in a couple countries. We think that there's a potential that that would scale, and certainly what we would like is multiple NGOs to get on the same platform, so if it works in a couple countries, the platform can be scalable to work in multiple different countries. I guess the last thing I'll say is something that we are not as good at in the private end of the business is some of the countries that you have to work in. But many of those countries that are developing countries actually are seeking out foreign direct investment, so we don't do enough where NGOs and private industry go into countries together. I think that's very important in the future, especially in the countries. I would look at a country like Vietnam. They want a lot of foreign direct investment. They do have a lot of social issues, and I think they would welcome NGOs as well as private industry to go in those countries. We need to do that better so they understand what technology, so they understand that private and NGOs can work together so we can move this ahead.
I think you made an interesting point about some of the countries where we all work that are even more challenging than Vietnam in terms of the road ends, and you still got tens of thousands of people to reach beyond that. So the thought of going in together is actually an interesting one.
Right.
How do you work together on the infrastructure?
Yeah, I think for us, primarily, we like to see it. I mean, most of us at UPS, we have this thing called constructive dissatisfaction, which essentially means we like to look at the process and have arguments with one another to how to make it better, and that's how generally we do make things better. To go in these very, very difficult places, we need to go in physically as private industry and see what it's like on the ground, what you folks deal with every day, so some of our folks can start thinking about that. We do that to a small degree. We probably need to do that to a major degree, but we need to do it across different disciplines. We need to have technology companies come in with supply chain companies, come in with telephonic, mobile phone companies, to come in with the IKEAs of the world, who I think are willing to do that, so we can see firsthand what the real issue is and go back and think about, okay, how can we coordinate this?
There was a question over here from a woman over here. Yes? Is there a second mic?
There's another one there.
Why don't we take a question from this side of the room while we're dealing with the technical issues, but we won't forget you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Andrew Mack. I'm AM Global here in Washington, and we do a lot of work with companies that are trying to find NGOs and NGOs that are trying to work with companies. So my concern for the panel is excellent. My concern is that innovation doesn't become yet another flavor of the month in the aid world, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. I can track my career by every 18 or 24 months, the new term of art that goes into the space. And specifically, I'm interested in one thing which we haven't discussed so far, which is innovating around the business model itself. We get rewarded in this space specifically for the size of the problem, not the size of the solution or the speed of the solution. Your budget goes up depending on the size of the problem that you're trying to solve. And yet a lot of the things that we're looking at require not just the initial solution, but a long-term path toward development and a long-term path towards solution. I would be very interested in hearing more about that piece of it, changing the incentive patterns so that we get some of these longer-term impacts that everyone, I think, was looking for. Thank you.
Mirza, you want to take a crack?
Yeah, I can take a crack at that. I think that part of this public-private partnership is going to be about trying to change the incentive mindset. I think the private sector will have to recognize, at least we are trying to push hard on it, that abnormal profits, large profits in areas of the world which are very poor are not on. and that we have to somehow change the mindset there in order to leave some of the resources that are generated, some of the revenue that's been generated for social development in those areas. And with impact investors, as I was saying earlier, there is attraction. There's a new breed of private sector people whose incentives are somewhat aligned to what we've been hearing on the panel here, which is a real social concern. So the next generation, beyond the corporate social responsibility that we've all been interested in and we've heard about, I think it's time for a new evolution in that. And I think that the incentives and the measurements that we have in social development have to change. That, we're having some fascinating conversations with our social development agencies, the Aga Khan Health Services and the Education Services, where we're saying that actually this is an investment in your schools and clinics. You will have to give some money back, even if it's just the principle that comes back. And, initially it was like, no, but we like grants. And we want just, but now what we are finding out is that as they are forced to think about a return, they are becoming inherently sustainable. Because they're saying, oh gee, how much can we pay the nurses at the clinic? How much is going to be the user fee? So all those things are beginning to emerge, which is so changing the mindset. So I think incentives on both sides will have to change, and I agree with that.
Yeah, and Scott had also talked about skin in the game, but I know Greg's eager to...
Just to add another point too, the realities of the world, our government's support to programs are shrinking and aren't being managed well. So it's a reality that we need to change the way we do business, to partner with the private sector who bring their unique skills to the task, and who, UPS is the best example of all, and the way Dan was just saying about how the volunteers step forward and even have an impact on saying, this crowd over here isn't a good one to work with. So it's the new reality, and it's here for the long haul, I'm convinced.
Take one last question.
Thank you. My name is Julia Sanchez. I'm with the Canadian Council for International Cooperation. Thank you very much for a fascinating panel on an issue that is complex, and I think you tried to work through some of that complexity at the beginning. But I think we find often when we're talking about private sector and partnerships with the private sector that it's very confusing at times. And I got the sense at one time that NGOs were the public for some and were the private for others. Anyway, so it is complex. But your comments are very useful, and I think many of us agree that when we're talking about innovation and these partnerships, there's enormous amount of potential. My comment, though, was along the lines of the gentleman who spoke at the end. I really liked what, Lisa, you said, that it's important to clarify, I can't remember the exact word you used, but what does success look like? And that it will look very different for NGOs than it does for companies, and we have to start from there if we want to work together. I would offer that success to NGOs is ending poverty. And poverty is not a technical problem, it's a political problem.
That's right.
And it has a lot to do with what Mr. Mirza just said, of the inequity that we have everywhere in the world, not only in poor countries, of excessive profits that are not reinvested into social and other programs and that don't benefit the poor. Where companies, of course, play a critical role in shaping that agenda and that inequity. So all that, it's reality. We do, I think, need and want to work together, but I think it's very important that we realize that we really are aiming at very different things. And I was wording it a little bit different, or thinking about it a little bit different than the previous speaker, but our objective is not to grow our clientele. We don't want to have more poor people to service.
Correct.
More efficient. We want to have less people, right? So it is countercurrent with the way corporations work. They want to create more markets for their products, right? And so the more efficient they are, the more people they can serve. We're moving in the other direction. We want to serve less and less people. So how do we find a way to collaborate and to use innovative, both, because just a parenthesis, I saw a very interesting survey of a whole bunch of NGOs and of companies that had been asked separately why they wanted to work with each other. And both the companies and the NGOs had, because the others are innovative as one of their key reasons. So NGOs were perceived as innovative, which we are, by the companies, and NGOs perceive the companies as innovative. which they are. So there's, something to be done there in both directions, right? Anyway, that's my comment. There is a Thank you.
I'll just take a quick shot at that. And I'll use Haiti as an example. After the earthquake, we certainly wanted to help not only UPS, but our friends from TNT, Maersk, and we brought in a lot of supplies, and since UPS, our Miami air fleet, was closest to the action, we decided that we would fly some missions down there to certainly support multiple NGOs. We couldn't land in Port-au-Prince, and if you want to know, General Handy, who I talked to, said that there's food rotting in Port-au-Prince and people are starving. So what we did was we flew all of our aircraft into Santo Domingo. We unloaded the planes, got a convoy of trucks with a lot of security, and ran in from Santo Domingo into Haiti. Now, that is a problem because politically, I can tell you that customs organizations around the world are, in some countries, very, very difficult to deal with. And if you want to know how to answer that question, the one way that I think hasn't been tested is to have private industry and NGOs go in together to meet customs officials with information that says, oh, by the way, your people are hungry, and when I talked to the CEO of Unilever at Davos this year, he said, Dan, it's not a question of food in the world. There is plenty of food to feed everyone. It's a question of not being able to get the food to the right people who need the food at the right time. There is tons of food rotting every day in this world that are sitting outside of countries that need it because from a customs perspective, we can't get the food into those countries.
Well, even within countries.
And within.
Because of logistics.
A controversial note to end on. We are out of time, so I want to thank you. I think there were two themes running throughout all of the excellent responses from the panel. One which was sharing, collaboration, shared platforms, sharing ideas, and the other was data and measurement. And I think we also heard the importance of all the time spent up front before you embark on these innovative collaborations to make sure you've got shared motivation, shared agenda, shared definition of success, which of course then leads into how are you going to measure success and agreement on how you're going to measure success before you start. And I think another key theme was the ability to develop one platform that is a shared platform so things really can be taken to scale and we can reach as many people as possible. I think a last takeaway is the need to create a space for innovation, whether it's a line in your budget or it's a monthly celebration of the greatest innovation that happened. I think it's really important to put that in as a value. And I think we've had diverse views and a lot of expertise, so I'd ask you to join me in giving a round of applause for this great panel.